All
Excellent.
right. Well, thank you everyone for joining Score Maine today, as well as Tom from and the Maine Technology Institute. This is our webinar on the overview of the Maine Technology Institute. We're happy to be partnered and sponsored by the Maine Technology Institute. Score ourselves, we're a resource partner of the Small Business Association, and if you don't know, we offer free and confidential business mentoring for anyone. And thanks again, Tom and the Maine Technology Institute for making this possible. If you have any questions, feel free to queue them up in our chat or the Q&A tab. And without further ado, Tom, why don't you take us away?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's great to be here. I've done a number of these at this point, and always a really rewarding discussion. Get lots of great questions. So, looking forward to hearing what sorts of questions folks might have. This presentation generally, the core presentation generally takes about 20 to 30 minutes, so we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So yeah, my name is Tom Kittredge. I am a senior investment officer at the Maine Technology Institute. I've been there since early 2020, which was an interesting time to join, as you can imagine. Let me see. So Maine Technology Institute, you can see what our core mission is here. I'm not going to read it off, but really what we exist to do, we are a nonprofit primarily funded through the state of Maine, whose mission is to support innovation in the state with the underlying goal of creating economic development. So the hope is really that by providing resources, primarily financial resources, to businesses in Maine who have an innovation, who are looking to scale that innovation, that will in turn lead to economic growth. And I'll speak as to kind of what we mean by economic growth or economic impact, but you can probably picture what some of those things are. So that includes the creation of well-paying jobs, growing revenues, helping other businesses. But again, I'll go into that a little deeper farther in the presentation. So just very briefly, the history of MTI. So we were founded by the state of Maine, by the legislator in 1999. We were founded along with our sister organization, the Maine Venture Fund. And the reason that we were created at that time is Maine was lagging behind the rest of the country in terms of investing in research and development and innovation. I think at the time we were actually either 49th or 50th in the country when it comes to per capita investment in innovation. So there was a feeling by the legislature at the time that it was imperative that for Maine's economy to kind of advance into the 21st century, that we had to provide more resources to innovators. And so that's why MTI was founded along with Maine Venture Fund. So you can see, in 2005, we'd already done 500 projects. At this point, as of 2000, it says 202, but it should be 2023, we'd invested over $300 million in Maine-based organizations and seen a tremendous amount of success stories. And it's been, I've been with MTI for 5 years, and personally, it's just been really exciting to see companies that I worked with who came to MTI just with an idea, who have now grown and have multiple employees and consistent sustainable revenue. And that's been incredibly rewarding. So just a little bit about the scope of MTI funding and to kind of capture what sort of stage of business we work with. And the answer is a really broad array. So you can see idea all the way to sustainability. So we work with companies that are pre-MVP, minimum viable product, pre-prototype, all the way up to companies that have been in existence for decades and are sustainable, but maybe have a new product that they're seeking to roll out or scale, or a new business practice that's really innovative. So we really work with companies across their growth trajectory. I would say the earliest sorts of companies we work with are companies that may not have a product yet, may not have a minimum viable product or a prototype, but they have some degree of validation. So, it's not just an idea, it's an idea with some validation. And by validation, I mean customer discovery. So having gone out and spoken with prospective customers, in addition to market research. So having done some research to quantify the size of the market and really demonstrate that there's a viable opportunity there that'll allow you to grow an actual business, rather than it just being kind of a side hustle. We want to see that there's a real market there, but it can be quite early stage. So in terms of key requirements, so fit to MTI, there's 5, and you'll see them here, and I go into each of them in a little more depth later on. But very briefly, shared goals, that means shared desire to create economic impact in Maine, which basically boils down to, is your business looking to grow from wherever it is here in Maine in a way that will create economic impact? Innovative and forward thinking. innovation is a really, really key core element to MTI and what we look to support. And we're not a fit for all businesses. We're really looking for businesses that are doing something distinct and novel and unique that's differentiated from what's already out there. Often that means that it's a product that's novel and distinct and unique. It can also be that there's a business process or a manufacturing process that's unique that gives the business a competitive advantage. So, in a manufacturing example, maybe the product itself is something that's already out there, but you've designed a really innovative way of creating that product that allows you to sell it for half the cost, or allows you to scale it, or deliver it much faster. But there has to be some innovation that's linked to a competitive advantage for you that allows you in turn to scale the business. Maine-based organizations. So again, I'll go into this in a little more depth, but basically we're looking to support organizations that are either fully based in Maine or predominantly based in Maine. 7 targeted technology sectors. So MTI, when we were founded, we were tasked with supporting 7 technology sectors, and I'll run through those in a moment, but we only work with businesses within those 7 sectors. And then last, access one-to-one matching funds. So for any MTI supported project, we need to see at least one-to-one match in terms of what MTI is able to put out the door. And again, I'll go into all of these. So just a little bit more on that first one, economic impact potential. So MTI, why we exist ultimately is to grow Maine's economy. So we're looking to see businesses that are seeking to scale here in Maine and create economic impact. So some of the key metrics we look at when assessing whether or not a business has economic impact potential is what is the likelihood of creating or retaining quality jobs statewide. So by quality, not necessarily minimum wage, but jobs that allow people to make a living wage and really support themselves. The growth and acceleration of revenues. So, is a business looking to grow here in Maine? And that in turn, has revenue implications for the state if you're paying tax revenues and other kind of economic benefits to the state of Maine. Attraction and leveraging of additional capital or other investments. So either one is, this is slightly separate, but bringing in revenue, so selling outside of Maine and bringing that money into the state of Maine, but also in terms of attracting capital into Maine. So maybe getting investment from investors who are outside of the state who are now investing in a Maine-based business. And then lastly, indirect economic impact. So how does your business positively impact other businesses in the state? Maybe because it's you work with a Maine-based supplier and their business benefits from the existence of your business, or maybe you're partnering up with other businesses, or you have vendors or contractors or consultants. So what's kind of the larger impact of your business? And then I should also mention, we do look at things like social and environmental impact as well. They're a little more secondary. They're not sufficient on their own. But if you have a business that has a really profound societal positive impact, that is something that MTI would look at favorably. But like I said, that economic impact piece has to be there as well. So Maine-based organization requirement. So the first one is registered Maine business. And all that means is your business must be registered with the state of Maine, specifically the Maine Secretary of State's Bureau of Corporations. That's a relatively easy process to do. You just go on their website and fill out some information. It generally can take a few weeks to get that turned around, but just something to be aware of is that's a requirement. It does not mean you have to be incorporated in Maine. So we work with, for example, a lot of Delaware-based corporations. So that's separate than incorporation. It's just being registered with the state of Maine. But the second part, this predominantly Maine-based business, that's a really key component. So there's not one hard and fast way for MTI to define if a business is Maine-based. We take a really holistic view and we look at a number of different factors to make that assessment. But some of the things we'll look at include, does the business have a physical headquarters here in Maine? Are there key decision makers for the organization based in Maine? And what's the ratio of full-time employees in Maine to employees in other locations? So really, especially with the advent of remote work, we work with a lot of companies who have some staff here in Maine and some staff elsewhere, and that's acceptable. But we want to see that the business is more based in Maine than it is anywhere else. So if you're a company has 20 employees in New York and 2 employees in Maine, that's probably not a fit. But if it's the inverse, if you have 20 employees in Maine and 5 employees in New York, that would be more likely to be a good fit. And then lastly, I will mention we do work with companies who maybe aren't Maine-based yet, but are planning to relocate here. And often, we'll allow them to submit an application, but they're not allowed to actually receive funding from MTI until they've demonstrated that they have relocated here. So it's a way to incentivize companies to move to the state, but like I said, they have to demonstrate they are relocated before they'd actually be able to get MTI funding. So innovation. So does the organization have an innovation that has the potential to scale and is meaningfully differentiated from existing alternatives in the market? And this differentiation can be demonstrated through customer discovery, market research, or a review of existing IP. So again, the reason MTI is focused on innovation is because it's been shown to be one of the most effective ways for businesses to scale, to grow. If you can show you're doing something that's differentiated and superior to what's already out there on the market, that's a really impactful way to gain market share and grow. So that's part of the reason that we're really looking to see innovation. And again, often the innovation that companies are able to demonstrate is that their product is innovative, that they're doing something that's distinct from what's already out there. But it can also be an innovative business process or an innovative manufacturing process. But you have to, again, be able to show that it gives you a meaningful competitive advantage. So these are MTI's 7 targeted technology sectors. So biotechnology, composites and advanced materials, environmental technologies, forest products and agriculture, information technology, marine technology and aquaculture, and precision manufacturing. We often work with businesses that are in more than one sector. So for example, we might work with a business that is both in the manufacturing space, but also in the IT space. So maybe it's a company that's using machine learning or AI to boost their manufacturing capabilities, so they can kind of make a case they're in multiple sectors. We also work with companies who the business itself might not clearly fall within one of these 7 sectors, but the innovation does. So that's most common with information and technology. So maybe if you are a hospitality chain, let's say you're a chain of hotels, but you have created a platform, an IT platform that's really distinct from anything else that's out there on the market, and that allows you to offer a much better experience to your customers, that potentially could be eligible. So even though it's technically a hospitality sector, as long as you're able to make the case that the innovation is in IT and that it's a real innovation and has, a meaningful impact, that could potentially be eligible. So just something to be aware of, that, generally, if you're able to demonstrate innovation, that often will help, allow us to fit you into one of these 7 sectors. And then lastly is this access to matching funds component. So this is actually something that was built into the statute that the state of Maine put in place when they created MTI. And that's a requirement that for any MTI funding, we have to see at least 1-to-1 matching funds. So what that looks like is if you come to MTI and you're looking for funding for a project, let's say you have a $100,000 project in mind, and we determine you're eligible for MTI funding and determine you're eligible for $50,000. So you have a $100,000 project in mind. MTI can put in half of that, $50,000, and then the business would need to put in the other half. So that, has to be in the form of cash generally, and I'll talk about some exceptions to that. But, in terms of the source of that cash, it can be from the founders themselves. It can be from another grant if you receive a grant from a separate source. It can be from a bank loan, from a line of credit, outside investors. There's a variety of different options, but you need to demonstrate that you have cash to match the MTI award that will be spent towards the same project that you are proposing. The one key exception here is for smaller requests. So generally, these are requests from businesses that are pre-prototype or maybe pre-revenue. We're able to accept a portion of the match as the unpaid labor, sweat equity of the founders. And generally, this should be no more than 30% of the request. And the logic here is often for early stage businesses, founders are putting in a lot of work on projects, but they're not being compensated in any way. So we want to recognize that unpaid labor that's going towards the project as part of the match. But like I said, generally, this should be no more than 30% of the match. So if you're requesting $10,000 from MTI, would still want to see $7,000 in match, but you could count 30% So 3,000 as in-kind match, so the value of your labor. And that should be linked to how much, what's the market value of your labor? So how much would you be paying somebody else to do the work that you're actually doing on the project? But if you have questions on that part, when you speak with an MTI representative, they can help kind of walk you through that component. I should note the one exception when it comes to matching funds, and it's pretty rare where we're not allowed to accept it, is if it's also a state of Maine funded entity. So the most obvious and most common example is Maine Venture Fund. So if the Maine Venture Fund decides to invest in your business, and you're trying to use that funding to match MTI, that wouldn't be acceptable because basically both our pools of funding come from Maine taxpayers. So we can't use that as match. But that's one of the only exceptions. As long as the funding isn't from basically state of Maine taxpayers, then we can generally accept it as match. So MTI funding scales with you. So this is really just a way to demonstrate that the idea of MTI funding is we want to grow with a business, and generally what that looks like is multiple awards. So MTI has different ranges of funding that are linked primarily to how far along your business is. So a business that has an idea, has validation, so customer discovery and market research, but doesn't have a minimum viable product yet or doesn't have a prototype, would probably assess that you're in our range 1 category. So that's between $0 to $25,000 in MTI funding. So you could, again, this is assuming you meet all the other eligibility criteria I just spoke about, apply for up to $25,000, maybe to work on prototype development or getting to an MVP or some other really essential need for your business. And then assuming that project is successful and you kind of reach that next tier, you could come back to MTI and apply for follow-on funding. And the idea is that, as you hopefully successfully achieve these projects and grow as a business, you're able to come back multiple times to tap into money. I see that Samantha raised her hand. Do we want to take questions now, Jasper? I'm happy to.
Oh, I can definitely. Oh, it looks like Samantha put her hand
Oh,
down. May have been a misclick, but
okay.
if you do have a
Well, if there are
question,
questions, I'm happy to take them at the end, and maybe I'll cover what the
hmm,
question was as I go.
yeah, totally.
Okay.
It looks like they didn't put a message through. May just been a click. We'll just note that you do have a question.
Okay, well, I'll keep going, and like I said, happy to answer questions at the end. So like I was saying, so MTI funding is designed to scale with you as an organization, as a business. MTI has a cumulative grant limit, you'll see down here at the bottom, of $100,000. So basically, once a business has received up to $100,000 in MTI funding, they are no longer eligible for grant funding. However, MTI also offers loans and will occasionally become an equity investor. And the idea is we have a limited pool of funds we can put out the door, so we can't just put out endless grant funding. But if we put out a loan or an equity investment, that's money that hopefully down the line we'll get back from the business, either because they'll repay the loan or because they'll have a successful exit. And that's then money that goes back into MTI's pool of funding that we can then put out the door. So we do offer loans and equity. Those would almost always be for companies that are already generating revenue. We do generally look to see that a company has demonstrated that they have some real traction before we're able to put out loans or equity. But it is just something to be aware of, that we don't just do grants. We do loans and equity. Though generally when a business comes to MTI for the first time, what we talk to them about is grant funding. So this is basically just some key information that I've already shared, but just a few things to flag. So the amount of funding that MTI generally puts out the door is between 6 to 10 million annually. And again, I would say the bulk of that is in the form of grants, but definitely, a few million is in the forms of loans and equity. And as you can imagine, the loans and equity tend to be larger. So I would say a general, loans and equity tend to be between 100,000 to 300,000 in terms of the amount. But again, those are things that are generally going to businesses that are already demonstrating traction in the market and have a really clear case that they're on the path to scalability. Those are kind of the two of the key requirements for getting loans or equity. There's generally a 2 to 3 month application review process from the date that you submit your materials to MTI to the point where you get either an upvote or a no vote or a maybe. But you're welcome to get started on the project while you're awaiting MTI decision making. as I, this again, average equity award between 50 to 300,000, matching funds, one-to-one match. And then typical funding role, this is specific to equity, but a top-off investment, which means that MTI would come in and be would not be the lead investor. So in terms of the application process and what that looks like, so assuming that you think there's a chance that you might be eligible for MTI funding, so you feel like you have an innovation and you're aspiring to grow your business here in Maine, the first step would be to submit an interest form via MTI's website. Then you'd want to meet with an MTI representative to determine eligibility for MTI support. So once you submit this interest form, somebody from MTI would reach out to you, chat through your business, what sort of project you might be seeking support on, and then would go from there. And then if you're invited to apply, you'd submit a funding request with the following documents. So a scope of work, which would describe what is your project you're seeking support on. It would have clear deliverables and a clear timeline. A budget form describing what are the major expenses linked to the projects and what is the sources of matching funds. And then an application form, which is a Word document describing the economic impact, team, innovation, market, and your business model. And then await an MTI funding decision, which can take between 1 to 4 months. Generally, I would say 2 months is pretty standard. And then if approved, there's some ongoing reporting requirements. So for grant funding, all that means is we expect you to submit a final report documenting how the project went when you complete it, and update on the budget and the expenses. If you receive a loan or an equity investment, there's some additional reporting requirements as well. Basically, we ask you to do regular quarterly check-ins on how the business is going. So when is a good time to contact MTI? So again, when's a good time to submit an interest form to our website to speak with an MTI representative? So these are some of what I would say are kind of the basic prerequisites in terms of what you should be able to discuss. So one, what is the problem you are addressing? So how have you determined that there's a real problem out there that's being unmet? Do you have any supporting evidence through, again, customer discovery or market research? What is your innovation and how is it differentiated from existing options? So you'll see down here that I mentioned the competitive landscape, but it's helpful if you can say, here's my innovation, here's the competition, and here's how what I'm doing is different from the competition. Customer discovery, again, have you gone out and spoken to prospective customers? Ideally, these would not be friends and family. These would be people who are strangers and don't have an incentive to tell you what you want to hear, essentially. Team with complementary skill sets. So MTI generally likes to see founding teams with more than one person. We've just found that those tend to be a little more successful. With that said, we do also support businesses that just have one sole founder. But in that case, we like to see that you have some sort of support network. So that might be in the form of mentors, advisors, a score advisor, for example. It might be that you have some employees or contractors, but we want to see that there are some other folks who are involved in bringing the project to fruition and helping scale the business. Again, competitive landscape and market opportunity. So that's just saying, have you done some research into what's the competition and what sort of market opportunity might exist? And I'll say that SCORE has proven to be a really tremendous asset for a lot of our companies in helping them explore these two things, the competitive landscape and market opportunity. So I definitely recommend availing yourself of a SCORE mentor if you're feeling like this is something you need some help on. And then the resources you will need to move the innovation forward. So that's really just having a sense of what sort of project you might be seeking support on and how that project will help move the innovation forward. And then this is my last slide, and this just goes over some other programs that MTI offers. So what I've just been describing is what we call business innovation funding, and that's very much the bulk of what we do. But there are a few other programs that I should flag just because they can be useful for folks. One of them is something we launched about 2 years ago in collaboration with the Department of Economic and Community Development. It's called the Maine Entrepreneurial Resource Corps. And basically what it is it's a way for businesses to hire consultants, Maine-based consultants, for short-term consulting work with some support from MTI to pay for that. So basically we're able to put in up to half of the funding to pay for a consultant. They have to be part of what we call our main, really the MERC network. So basically they need to themselves be onboarded by our program and kind of approved, but that's generally a pretty simple process. Alternatively, we're able to recommend consultants. So we have a big database of consultants that have registered with Merck. So if you come to MTI and you say, hey, I have a need for a consultant to help me build a business, financial model, or to do some marketing research, or to help me file for a patent, MTI can send you a list of consultants. We won't recommend a single person, but we can send you a list of 3 to 5 consultants in the space. And then you can pick one, and MTI would be able to provide support to pay for that. Somebody separate on our team manages that program, but the process to get linked to that program is the same as business innovation funding, which is to go on our website and submit a interest form. You just select Maine Entrepreneurial Resource Corps from the dropdown. One of the nice things about this particular program is it doesn't count towards that 100,000 grant funding limit that I mentioned. So it's because it's a separate pool of money that comes from a separate source, we don't count it towards that grant funding limit. So if you have a consulting need, I recommend going through Merck rather than through business innovation funding, just because A, it's a simpler process to get approved, and B, it won't count towards your business innovation funding cap limit of 100,000. So it's a good way to kind of keep your powder dry in that sense. Event sponsorship. So MTI provides sponsorship for events that celebrate, champion, and educate Maine's innovation economy. That tends to be most relevant for ecosystem partners. So if you are let's say, for example, the Maine Center for Entrepreneurs or SCORE, if they're running an event that champions or educates or celebrates Maine's innovation economy, MTI might come in and be a sponsor and help pay for that. Federal Funding Technical Assistance Program. So we provide free expert guidance on submitting SBIR and STTR grant requests to the federal agencies. So for folks who aren't aware, SBIR and STTR, there are 2 types of grant funding that are available from federal agencies. I think there's about 13 federal agencies who provide funding through SBIR and STTR. Basically, they're very explicitly focused on research and development. So these are focused on very high-risk innovations, in different sectors. So one department is the Department of Energy, and another one is the Department of Transportation and the Department of Agriculture. They're looking to support research and development in high-risk areas. So they want to see research and development initiatives that might fail. That's actually one of the things they're looking for, is something that are risky. But there's a lot of funding available through SBIR and STTR. And MTI basically offers some pro bono assistance in submitting grant applications to these federal agencies. We won't actually write the grant for you, but we'll provide, a lot of feedback and expertise. And the folks we have on the team have decades of experience applying to these sorts of awards, so they can be really valuable. And we are able to provide a little bit of funding through this program to hire a grant writer, but you have to be deemed eligible or likely to succeed in submitting an application to be able to tap into that. So again, if you're interested in exploring that, you'd go onto MTI's website and you'd submit an interest form, and you'd just select Federal Funding Technical Assistance Program. And then the very last one I'll mention is Entrepreneurial Support Organization funding. So again, that's funding that we're able to put out to some of our partners who are also working to support innovation and entrepreneurship in Maine, who have programmatic offerings. We're able to, put out some funding out the door to support them. So that was a ton of information. I'm more than happy to take questions. I'll also plot my contact info in the chat and the link to the MTI interest form in case folks are interested in chatting with myself or any of my colleagues to get more information. But yeah, happy to take information or questions.
Yeah, and I'll be sure to include those in the follow-up as well, so that everyone has a permanent way to access it. We've got a few questions that have come in to the event here. Let's start off with Raphael asking if a child care center would qualify for MTI funding.
So every business is different, and I would say generally the answer is probably no, unfortunately. With that said, I can envision maybe an exception. If you're developing some sort of IT platform, and that platform is going to allow you to move from having 1 location to 10 locations, maybe that would be a fit. But if you're just seeking funding to, continue running programming at 1 location, or, if there's not a very clear innovation argument, childcare is not, unfortunately, one of MTI's 7 sectors. So it doesn't seem to be a sector fit unless, again, you could demonstrate that there's an innovation that falls within one of our sectors. But I would say probably not, unfortunately. But again, it'd be a little bit dependent on the circumstances.
Hmm. And another one, as far as if they are Steve Whitney is has a company that manufactures and sells pet products online. He says it seems like his idea is considered innovative, but maybe not quite innovative enough. He knows it's not a tech or intellectual property type, but Steve, I'm not sure, Steve, if there's, I know you've provided a lot of information on um, your business here, but I'm not quite sure what you're asking. I'm sorry.
Well, if
Um,
he's just trying to determine whether or not he's a fit, again, I mean, manufacturing, I mean, specifically the language is precision manufacturing. So, it generally is manufacturing that has, a pretty high tech component to it. But without knowing all the details, my recommendation would be to submit an interest form, which would link you to either myself or one of my colleagues, and they can, you can go into greater depth about your innovation and what the innovation argument is. And those meetings generally last up to an hour, so it's a good way to kind of bounce it off somebody at MTI. So if you think that there might be an innovation argument, I definitely think it's worth submitting an interest form request via our website just to chat with somebody a little more in depth.
Absolutely. We have, let's see, what's their name? Carissa, wondering if you have any resources for other states available that you recommend.
Resources from other states, is that specifically funding resources, or is that what sort of resources does she mean? Or
Uh,
I don't know if she can add that to the chat.
yeah, Carissa says yes as far as funding resources, I believe.
Um, Not off the top of my head. I guess it would be dependent on what state you're in. I don't, for example, New Hampshire, I don't
Texas.
believe. Oh, Texas. Yeah, I don't
Mm,
specifically know. I don't know about Texas
mm,
personally. I mean, I know that there's federal funding available again through SBIR and STTR, but I don't know about Texas, unfortunately.
yeah, sorry about that, Carissa. But hopefully there's maybe a local version of, maybe an MTI equivalent in Texas. And then we have Tyler asking if the MTI has any history of funding or working with blockchain and digital asset companies.
I can definitely say there are some. I know that I've seen some companies come through that have blockchain components. I can't think of I can't think of a specific one off the top of my head, but I know that we've seen those, and I mean potentially those would be a fit. Those definitely would fall in IT sector. So again, you just need to make an innovation argument.
Absolutely.
Showing that you're doing something differentiated, that it's distinct, and that there's a market opportunity, and that what you're doing. But from a sector fit, that would definitely be a fit sector wise. But again, it would come down to that innovation argument.
All right. We've got a few more coming in, Phil. Starting with Scott and Michelle. They have a 2-year plan to set up a full production facility alongside their current distribution business in Portland. When should they start applying for grants? I believe it may be a multi-million-dollar project.
Sorry, a boat production facility, did you say?
Um, they didn't say what type of production, just a
Oh, production
full
facility.
production for
I,
whatever their product is.
I mean, there's no harm in submitting an interest form now. Again, it's grant funding, so it's not like you're diluting your ownership. It's not like you're taking on debt. Sometimes people choose. Sometimes people realize that they can do some of the work in their project for cheap. If what you're looking for support on is customer discovery or market research, you might be able to do that for free or via pro bono support from somewhere like Score. But I would say that, there's we work with a lot of companies who apply very early stage. Um, and again, if you're able to demonstrate there's innovation, that there's a tech sector fit, that there's a path to scalability, it's fine to apply quite early. So, like I said, it doesn't hurt to submit an interest form. All that leads to is a conversation with an MTI employee who can maybe help guide you whether or not it makes sense to apply.
Awesome. They're also wondering how long does their process generally take? The TR process generally take?
So from the date that you submit an application, so the way it works is, so you'll speak with an MTI representative, and they'll help you determine whether or not you're likely to be eligible. Likely, we're not going to give you a yes or a no on that call, but we can generally give you a sense of whether or not you're likely to succeed, and then it's up to you whether or not you want to put in the effort of putting together an application. And then if you decide to move forward with putting together an application, an MTI representative can generally look at your draft materials and provide some feedback and suggestions prior to uploading to our review portal. And then once it uploads to our review portal, it's generally about a 2-month turnaround process to get an application approval. And the reason it generally takes that much time is we operate on a first come, first served basis. So generally there's about 2 months of applications ahead of you in the pipeline. But that's why the timing can differ. It's really dependent on how many other applications are ahead of you in the pipeline that need to be reviewed. But we don't have deadlines. It's a rolling application period. So we encourage people to, apply when they feel good about their application materials. The last thing I'll mention on that is, so, it generally takes about 2 months for MTI to get to a funding decision, but you're welcome to get started on the project that you're proposing prior to MTI making a funding decision. The risk obviously being that, if it's a project that's fully contingent on getting MTI support, there's always the risk that it'll be a no. But if it's something you're planning to do either way, or it's something where you could get started and use the matching funds component first, then that's fine to get started. You don't need to wait for a funding decision to get started on the project.
Awesome. We have someone with an anonymous question. They are a technology-based company based in Dubai, but they're looking to move their base to the US. What steps should they take to make the transition, and what key considerations do you think they should keep in mind during the process?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak more specifically to Maine than I can the US broadly. I would say there's an organization called Maine and Company that specifically works with companies that are seeking to relocate to Maine. So it would definitely be worth reaching out to them. I think the website is just Maine and Co, or you can Google them. From an MTI perspective, if you're thinking of relocating to Maine and you're interested in tapping into grant support, you're definitely more than welcome to reach out to MTI and schedule a meeting and speak with somebody. And we could potentially conditionally award you funding. Again, you wouldn't actually get the funding until you demonstrate that you have relocated to Maine. So you need to demonstrate that you are relocated. But it is something that you could at least apply for and get a sense of whether or not you're likely to be eligible. Again, with the knowledge that the funding wouldn't go out the door until you demonstrate you're Maine-based.
Gotcha. Wayne is asking, Wayne has a Maine state licensed certified food producing facility. He operates utilizing seafood HACCP, and I believe he's wondering if he would be eligible. But Wayne is also wondering if improvements to his facility would make it global, to adhere to the Global Food Safety Initiative, um, allowed under the marine technology aquaculture sector. I'm not sure. So I'm not sure what's
Well,
going on
I
there.
can comment generally on that. So unfortunately, again, so when we were established in the late 90s, the state of Maine determined 7 technology sectors they wanted to invest in. Unfortunately, there's a few key sectors to Maine's economy that were not identified and haven't been added. Those include food and beverage. Those include hospitality. Those include, the art world. So unfortunately, those aren't MTI sectors. So technically speaking, we generally don't support companies in those space, unfortunately. With that said, there are exceptions to that, and there's some of the ones I touched on. So again, if there's an IT component to the business and that's going to allow it to scale, we might be able to support that. The same goes with manufacturing. So I'm trying to think of a good example. We work with an organization called Blue Ox Malt House, and they produce basically malts that go into beer.
I'm a
And they
big
have
fan
a
of those
really,
guys.
yeah, they have a really innovative manufacturing process to do that. So even though they're not really a fit for MTI, as a business, their innovation, their manufacturing process is innovative, and that makes them eligible. So it would really, generally, I would say from the information I have, it doesn't sound like a fit to me. If it's just upgrading a facility to meet standards. But again, there might be some nuances that I'm not capturing in the question. So if you think there might be a real innovation case there, and again, because part of the reason that would be a shaky innovation case, from what I understand, is if you're basically upgrading your facility, but it's going to upgrade it to be similar to other facilities, or if you're buying tech off the shelf rather than creating your own technology, I don't think it would satisfy the innovation argument per se. But again, I mean, I have very limited information from that question, so I would encourage you to, if you think it might be a fit, just submit an interest form and have an opportunity to speak with an MTI representative more deeply.
Yeah, and then Wayne, if you have any further clarification, feel free to queue it up. We have some more questions rolling in as well, though. One from Michael, I guess, touches on that as well. Honestly, the quickest way to determine your project's eligibility wouldn't be this an intake form or message someone on MTI directly.
So I don't know if it's on my end. I didn't fully hear that as a question. Do you mind repeating it, Jasper?
Of course, yeah. Sorry, like I said, new microphone test in here.
Sure.
Quickest way, since it touches on it, what would you say the quickest way to determine your project's eligibility would be? Submit an intake form or speak to someone at MTI directly.
Yeah. So what an intake form does is it basically we used to call them an intake form. We now call them an interest form, but they're the same thing. It's just I'm trying to upgrade. Get used to saying interest form now. But basically all that does is it basically just, it goes into our system, and then you'll get assigned an MTI representative who will reach out to you. So that if you want to speak to somebody at MTI, that's how you go about doing it. Because it creates a record in our database so that when we have a conversation with you, we can take notes. It also asks you a few questions when you submit it that we can then use as the basis of our conversation. But yeah, the way to speak to an MTI representative is to submit an interest form. And then from there, somebody will reach out with you and schedule a call or a Zoom meeting or something. And that'll be an opportunity for you to speak more deeply as to what your business is and what the innovation might be and whether or not you might be eligible.
Awesome. Wayne is saying that he'll reach out to MTI directly.
Great.
And that goes back, I think that links back to, since Wayne was talking about manufacturing, we have another anonymous attendee wondering about modernizing their operations. Example, companies who are paper-based looking to move to digital. Would you say that classifies as technology innovative?
Sorry, I keep going back to this. It depends idea.
Yeah.
You would need to, if the company itself is innovative, and then I don't know if the act of digitalizing something in and of itself is innovative, but if the product is innovative or if the company is innovative, then the act of digitalization, if you're able to show that will help the company scale, that could be a fit. Or I mean, it might be that if you're the first mover in your space that's going digital, then that could be an innovation argument. I don't know enough about the space, but you need to show that what you're doing is distinct from the competition, and that that's giving you some sort of competitive advantage because what you're doing is differentiated from your competition. So that's kind of how I would think about it.
Yeah, and then similarly from Bethany, Bethany is wondering about textile manufacturing, cut and sew contract manufacturing is their specific field. Would that fit into precision manufacturing?
It could.
Continues to be, it depends,
Well, it's also
Yeah.
just that I'm a generalist, so I don't necessarily deeply know about how textile manufacturing takes place. It could be precision manufacturing. It would depend on how intensive is the manufacturing, and also again what is the innovation argument. So you would need to demonstrate that either the product is innovative or the way you're manufacturing it is innovative.
Absolutely. Scott and Michelle are wondering once more. Have another question for us. I guess for you, a good point to touch on some key components of the MTI interest application.
Yeah, so I'll touch on two things. I'll touch on the interest form and I'll touch on the actual application. So the interest form, that's again how you reach out to MTI to schedule a talk. We basically ask for, I think it's like, there's some very basic information like what's your contact, what's your phone number, what's your email. And then we also ask for a little more in-depth information. So we ask you to self-identify what sector you might fall in. And again, we don't hold you to that, but if you think you might fit in an MTI sector, we ask you to identify that. We ask you to submit a non-confidential summary. So that's basically, if you're awarded MTI funding, we're required by the state of Maine to publish a brief summary of what your business and project are. But you can be very vague. Obviously, companies are concerned about sharing too much information publicly. So we ask you for a non-confidential summary, which is just whatever you feel comfortable sharing with the public that you don't feel like puts any of your business at risk. And then we have a few confidential questions that would stay exclusively within MTI. And those are, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is your innovation and why do you believe it's differentiated? And then how do you hope to use MTI funding? Again, I mean, the more information you can provide, the better, but you might not be sure whether or not you have an innovation. So you just, you can just put in whatever information makes sense. It's just something for us to have going into the conversation so we can do a little preparatory work so that we have a little sense of what the conversation is going to be and we can do a little research on our end.
Awesome.
So that's just the form to that you'd submit to speak to an MTI representative.
Mm-hmm.
If you're determined eligible to apply for MTI funding and you submit an application, the things we'd look to see is basically a project proposal. So that includes a scope of work, which asks you to identify what is the project you're seeking support on. What are the key activities that are part of that project? So for example, maybe the project, one of the key activities is getting to a prototype, and another key activity is developing branding, and a third key activity is filing for a patent. So those would be like one project with 3 different activities, and then some clear deliverables linked to each of those activities. So for example, the deliverable related to the branding might be that by the end of the project, you'll have a logo and a theme and some very specific things that we can check off at the end of the project. We have you submit a budget form, which basically says what are the major expenses that are associated with the project, and then also how are you going to pay for it. So part of it will be MTI funding, and then what's your source of matching funds. And then the last document is a Word document. And again, we have templates for all 3 of these things. And that asks you to speak about your economic impact potential of your business. So we ask you to look 3 years down the line. Where do you hope the business will be in terms of its number of employees, in terms of revenue, in terms of how much capital you'll have raised? And then we also have a section for you to talk in a narrative form a little bit more about your economic impact. The second is the team. So who are the key team members? And again, that can be both employees and founders, but also anybody else involved in bringing the project to fruition and helping the business grow. There's a section on the innovation and the value proposition. So what are you doing? Why is it innovative? What problem are you trying to solve? What's the value proposition for your customers? And again, I think that's something SCORE can be really helpful in helping folks figure out. Market, so just what is the market opportunity and how do you plan to tap into that market? Do you have a go-to-market strategy? What's your plan to actually reach the market that you identify? And then lastly, the business model, which basically breaks down to how do you plan to make money? So how do you plan to generate revenue? What are your major costs? What sort of capital might you need to grow? How do you plan to become profitable, essentially? And again, the farther along you are as a business, the more detail we expect. So a very early stage business that, doesn't even have a prototype and isn't generating revenue is going to be expected to, the threshold is a little lower, but also you'll probably be eligible for a smaller amount of money, where a company that's, already in business, has revenue, can provide financial information, will be looking for more detail, but you'd likely be eligible for a larger sum of funding.
Awesome. Great information, important to have if anyone's looking to apply for an MTI grant. We've got a couple more here. Another one from Tyler. He has 2. One is regarding Maine Entrepreneurial Resource Corps. Are there blockchain companies involved with the network of consultants, and he's interested in working with them or joining the network?
That's a great question. I'm not sure off the top of my head. My colleague Emily Braley runs that program, so she would be better equipped. If you're a consultant based in Maine, or if you offer consulting services, I definitely would encourage you to reach out to her and see if you're eligible to be onboarded. I would imagine that if there are blockchain consultants. I imagine that would be something that would be helpful to add to the resource core. I don't know off the top of my head whether or not those exist on the as part of our database yet, but I think it's definitely worth having those joining that.
Awesome. And Tyler's also wondering about event sponsorship. He's part of a networking group and is interested in working with MTI on their events. Do you know how he would get involved with that?
So if as I understood that question, he's wondering about tapping into MTI sponsorship, so getting sponsored for one of these networking events. So again, the criteria is that you have to demonstrate that your event is championing entrepreneurship and innovation in Maine, celebrating entrepreneurship and innovation, or educating. But again, really clear linkage to innovation and entrepreneurship specifically. If you are, again, the interest form is how you do that, and there's a drop down. And so when you go to the interest form, you have to put in your email address and create a password. And then the next step is you'll get a drop down menu, and it'll give you options of business innovation funding, which is the bulk of what we've discussed here today. Event sponsorship, the MERC program, the Maine Entrepreneurial Resource Corps, federal funding support, and I believe those are the only four. So you just kind of select which of those four you want. If you opt for sponsorship, the person who approves that is MTI's president, Brian Whitney. So he would basically submit that sponsorship request, provide a little bit of information, and then Brian would set up a call with you, and you'd speak through what your event is, and he'd determine whether or not it's eligible for MTI funding.
Awesome. I believe we may have time for one more here, or maybe a few more if you're willing.
Sure.
We've got another anonymous swamp person asking, they're wondering if upgrading equipment in their aquaculture processing facility might be a potential project, as they believe it maximizing efficiency would increase year-round employment opportunities in their area.
Yeah, so this is this question of upgrading equipment is always an interesting one. I would say it depends. If you're developing your own equipment, if you're actually creating something that's not out there on the market, that could potentially be a fit. If you're buying off the shelf, so you're buying upgraded equipment that already exists, that probably wouldn't satisfy the innovation argument. But if the business itself is innovative, then that might be it. For example, we work with there's a company we work with called Pemaquid Mussel Farms. They grow mussels, but they've developed their own innovative raft that kind of floats under the water, and it has a variety of innovative components to it. They have tapped into MTI funding to buy run-of-the-mill equipment, but the reason they're able to do that is because they're able to demonstrate that their process is innovative. So again, upgrading itself is generally not innovative if you're buying equipment off the shelf that already exists. But if you're able to satisfy the innovation argument in some other way, then you might be eligible to upgrade, is I guess what I'd say.
Awesome. We have one from Freddie, who's starting out a new IT consulting company. Would you say that you would be a fit, or if you know of any other resources other than MTI that would be a fit for that?
Well, again, I mean, I definitely think that tapping into the MERC Maine Entrepreneurial Resource Corps and becoming part of that database would be a fit. Generally, consulting firms aren't a fit, but I can think of a few exceptions. But generally, they're when consulting firms create some sort of IT product that allows them to really rapidly scale up their expertise. Or we work with a consulting firm in Biddeford called ATX Advisory, and they've created some IT products that allow them to really scale and enhance what they offer. And so through those products, they're able to satisfy the innovation part. But consulting firms in and of themselves wouldn't necessarily be a fit unless they're able to demonstrate that they have something else that falls into that space.
Awesome. And I believe we have one last one from Bethany here. How often do companies engage with a grant writer when applying for funding, or would you say that a lot of them DIY it?
A grant writer, did you say?
Yes.
For MTI funding, I would say I would recommend not hiring a grant writer. And the reason I say that is because MTI staff members, if we determine you're likely to be eligible, will work with you to provide a lot of feedback on your grant application and basically ensure that all the information that we need is included. So we can't guarantee you'll be approved, but we can at least guarantee that you'll be in a position where you're providing the information that needs to be provided. So generally when, the grant writing support that MTI offers is more commonly for those federal funding opportunities that SBIR and STTR. So if you speak to an MTI representative on that team and they think that you'd have a decent application for an SBIR, STTR application, we might be able to help you pay for a grant writer to submit an application of federal funding. But I would say for MTI funding specifically, no, don't. I would recommend not using a grant writer because it's just kind of a waste of resources.
Gotcha. Well, that is great information. I think that, if you believe that your product is innovative, I think everyone should, apply. And we here at SCORE love you guys at the MTI. We're really appreciative of everything you do. And if there's any, and I don't believe there's any further questions, it looks like. So I do just want to thank everyone for attending today's workshop. I want to thank you, Tom, for another great presentation. We will be sending a copy of the slides to everyone, as well as a recording that will be available as soon as I get it uploaded to YouTube and the processing processes. We'll also be sending out a brief survey. It would be really helpful for us here at SCORE if you fill it out, and we appreciate your feedback. And one more quick reminder, if you don't already have a SCORE mentor, you can apply for one for free at score.org. It's free, confidential one-on-one mentoring at any stage of your business and any type of business. And we want to thank MTI once more for being a sponsor of SCORE in this event. And Tom, anything else from you?
No, thanks. It's always a pleasure to do this, and I know that we often will, have an influx of interest form requests right after these meetings. So it's great to know there's a high turnout. Thanks everybody for the great questions. And again, if you think if you're curious to talk to an MTI representative more, I would just recommend submitting that interest form, and you'll get connected with someone. So thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Tom. Thanks again.
All right, take care, all.
Have a good one, everyone. Have a great day.